My name is Ed Neff. I'm with EY. I'm a principal in EY's Parthenon group, which is the strategy consulting group within EY. You might not have known that EY has strategy consultants, but we do. In addition, you may think of EY as doing financial services and audit, but we actually have a lot of other capabilities, which is the context for our participation on this panel today around business consulting, systems integration, process development, and in my world, strategy assessment, market assessment, and financial assessment. So I've been in the sort of telecom, media, and technology sector as a strategy consultant for more than, can you guys hear me all right?
Your mic cut out.
Hello? For more than 50 years. Sorry, more than 20 years. I'll just speak loudly. More than 20 years. And as mentioned, I primarily work with service providers, enterprises, and investors in the space. So I bring a commercial perspective here, hopefully.
As Ed struggles with his mic, Dr. Corbin, Dan, you want to speak to yours?
Yeah, I'm Dan Corbin. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the technical director at the headquarters Marine Corps of C4 in the Deputy Commandant for Information group. Spend most of my time putting in place the new technology, seeking out the new technologies that we need for making sure that they're aligned with the the strategy of the Marine Corps. If you're wondering, we've recently within the last year or so signed out our new IT strategies, referred to as the NetMod plan, which aligns to our the Commandant's Force Design 2030, which you'll probably hear mentioned numerous times if you go into the other panels and talking points there. It lays out what the Marine Corps' plan is over the next decade or so. Where I spent most of my time before I got this job, I was in acquisition. Did a lot of IT acquisition for the last 15 years or so. And before that, in and out of the Navy, I did acquisition and development of combat systems related items. Other than that, I'll pass it on to the next.
Brian.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Briancampo. I'm the Deputy CIO for the Coast Guard. I'm also in the Deputy CTO role for the department. So, I'm kind of looking at multiple aspects for where 5G can reach into us. I know we're looking at lots of connectivity options. We're looking for some interesting, sort of convergence of technology from a wireless perspective. And then I'm also trying to understand a little bit about some of the new use cases, some of the security aspects that 5G can help us with, some of the new use cases that ubiquitous connectivity can bring us. And then if you think about where we are at the department from my CTO hat, we're definitely looking at trying to understand a little bit about what the vendor community is starting to do, trying to understand where industry is finding useful niches. I think we'll talk about some of these things as we get into, but just really trying to understand a lot of the use cases that we don't think about, trying to learn from some of our industry partners, trying to think about strategies that commercial vendors are putting out, and ways that we can bring the mission, bring connectivity to the mission quicker, faster, and really more ubiquitously.
Mike.
Okay. Hi everyone, Mike Boute here. I'm with AT&T Indo-PACOM Strategy and Solutions. And so as such, I'm looking to, obviously AT&T is a very large company, global networks, 5G, security. How do we bring some of that goodness in the commercial sector into DoD to solve the use cases we're going to discuss here today? But my goal here for today is to provide an industry awareness, maybe a little bit of education, and then maybe a few opportunities that we might consider moving forward to get after this problem of 5G rollout to expeditionary comms. A little bit about myself. I'm a retired Air Force officer. Somehow they let an Air Force guy into a maritime conference. I'm not sure. Maybe Tyrone is to blame for that. But I got in. I had to sneak in through the back. But no, I'm glad to be here. And I think what I can bring is an Indo-PACOM perspective. I think if we can solve it in that theater, we can probably extrapolate and solve a lot of these problems in different areas because it is such a hard environment to roll out comms to. In my Air Force career, I did cyber operations, logistics. If you go back far enough, special operations. I was also the senior advisor for the Air Force network and overlooked cybersecurity issues, expeditionary comms. And then later, as a senior staff member of Pacific Air Forces, cyber, air, and space. So I got to take a look at the prism through that, how O-plans are drawn, how COM supports the O-plan, how these plans are flexed, or freedom of navigation, those types of things that go on in the Pacific, and the Korea flex that happened like 2017 to 2018. So it's part of that. Today I'm really interested what the perspective of my panel members are, and maybe I can try to add something to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So this is a panel discussion. This is a Q&A session in disguise, if you will. So you folks should feel free to step up to the mic and start lining up some hard questions for this set of folks. They actually know what they're talking about. That said, let me start with Ed. So this is too easy. Come on, being the commercial geek in the room, where do you see the intersection? Where do you see the mapping between the commercial use cases and the USDOD needs?
Yeah, so I think we have a number of frameworks for thinking about use cases, and if you think about 5G in terms of what it is really, and in terms of the capabilities that it enables and the technologies that it employs, it has obviously much faster mobile broadband speeds and sector capacity. Has much. Maybe I can just. You can cut it. Maybe I can just.
That's not 5G. Don't panic. Okay.
If you can just cut it, I'll just speak loudly, if that's okay. So then there's the low latency connections, and then the massive machine type communication. So basically means that you can connect many more things to 5G. And those are enabled by much greater bands of spectrum and types of spectrum, the more diverse antennas and connections, and improvements with their interface. And so all of that unlocks a number of use cases.
So speaking of use cases, I'm going to go to Brian and Dan both together. Not together. Applications. What do you see 5G is enabling? What are the new applications that come to mind? What do you want it to do for you? Let's go with Dan first. Why not?
Yeah, as you can imagine, as mentioned earlier, you have this opportunity now to use a lot more, I'll say, sources of data, sensors on the network, sensors available to you to provide information necessary to help in the decision-making process. I always think about, okay, you got to have this source of data, you got to get it someplace where you're going to transact on it, and then you're going to have to take that information that then gets generated and give it to a decision maker, whoever that is, a person or a thing, to be able to do something with this. We have lots of examples, right, that we're trying to do that now. When we first, many of you have probably heard of these tranches that DoD has put in place to support the sort of the development and build the muscles in the use of 5G, gave contractors the ability to provide use cases to us that or provide solutions to use cases that we provided. We sort of went about it probably incorrectly. We said, okay, what are the use cases, and then how are we going to use 5G to do those use cases, not really knowing what we were going to get. But it turns out we were right. I mentioned this force design item that Force Design 2030 that the Commandant has signed out, which lays out the strategy for the Marine Corps. Well, it turns out, it's everything that we're doing with respect to these use cases supports those activities, right? It's EABO. You probably heard about that. It's how do we operate in the Far East in a certain way that is different than before. Operating in that way requires you to have much greater information and be able to transact on that information and be able to do something with it, even when you may not have access to other connectivity outside of your own area. 5G enables us to do that in a limited fashion. So we're trying to figure out how to use that. Also important is the aspect of readiness of the force. One of the use cases that we put together was, okay, how do we improve the readiness of a warehouse specifically through the smart warehouse capability, get better value for what it is, and reduce the requirements that go into the warehousing area. We also have this other use case called which isn't paid for by OSD, but it was one that was sort of homegrown by the Marine Corps itself, called the Smart Base, Smart City, up in Lemoore, which is some self-driving vehicles and that kind of approach. So all of those activities are the muscles of being able to figure out how do you design it, what's the technology you put in place, what's the security piece, big part there, what's the security aspects of those things that you need to consider. So those applications, I think the use cases are going to come. We can't even imagine what we're going to be able to do with this once it's available, and we start to integrate this with other capabilities, AI, machine learning, and so forth as we move forward. So right now we're just trying to understand the infrastructure, how it supports these things, and I suspect over the coming years we'll have a much better appreciation of what we can actually do from an application standpoint.
Thank you. Brian, before you kick in, I am serious. There's a mic, there's a bunch of people. You got to be asking questions. Brian, use cases.
No, so I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, we're not really even envisioning the use cases, right? The use cases, I think, are still in the ideation stage. A couple of things, though, that I wanted to kind of mention are this idea of campus networks, I think, is really interesting with 5G, where we can not only leverage a service provider's network, we can leverage the speed and the ubiquity of 5G, but we can do it from a campus perspective, and we can kind of own the security of it. We can own a little bit of the traversal of the network. We can integrate the network a little bit more control and security-wise than we would with some of the other technologies. If you think about something like a shipyard, being able to have a campus network where everything's on the same network, whether it's traditional networks that are wireless, whether we're talking about some landline networks, being able to integrate those, and then the speed, I think, is incredible. If we're trying to figure out how to diagnose a system issue, and we're looking at something like a virtual training scenario, or we're trying to figure out what sensors data is coming across, we can do that a lot quicker. We can do it at a lot more fidelity when we're thinking about 5G and some of the data pieces. But I think there's also a lot of things where we would never have considered a wireless capability prior to 5G, something like shore ties, right? If you're thinking about bringing a boat into a pier and thinking about where that boat's going to get connectivity from the pier, it would be natural. We would never even think about doing that wirelessly under some of the more traditional networks. But now, shore ties are problematic. We have issues with, keeping shore ties. We've got salt spray. We've got tons of different things, the elements that we can't necessarily control. Trying to put another antenna on a boat, trying to understand where we can bring that connectivity in a new fashion, I think, is something that we really want to see. But I do want to stress, I think part of this is understanding what industry is going to do, understanding what other customers are looking for, and helping us understand how we can sort of coalesce those capabilities into some of the missions that we've got.
Thank you. Sir.
Hi, how you doing? Ed Leopold from Persistent Systems, mobile ad hoc networking company based out of New York. Just curious if you can talk to the future of 5G in terms of fault tolerance, in terms of operating in environments where there's no infrastructure. How can 5G perform with the fault tolerance without infrastructure in a mobile environment, which is what everybody in these services is dealing with, right? And just want to see what's the path forward for that. Over.
Let me sneak one of mine in as well, because you came really close to that one, which is, what does 5G enable that 4G did not? I'm going to throw it open to the panel, but Brian, you started going there, so I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I think if I put my DHS CTO hat on and talk about some of the other components, it's really easy to understand what an ad hoc network can do if you think about somebody like FEMA. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, they have to set up networks in places that don't have any other connectivity. The idea of a campus network, the idea of being able to bring in, a microwave backhaul or some sort of a satellite backhaul, bringing that and making it traverse over, a campus network on 5G, being able to do that translation, being able to bring in the security, being able to bring in the fault tolerance, as you said. There's a lot of capability that 5G as a technology can do that maybe even the 5G bands won't do. So there's a lot more to 5G than just speed, just the frequencies, just the replacement for 4G. I think 5G brings with it a variety of interesting use cases. Ad hoc networks being definitely one of them.
So I can't let this go. Mike, you're probably perfectly positioned to answer both the fault tolerance, resilience question, as well as the what is different between 4G to 5G. So,
Yeah, that's a wide open question. I think we touched on some of these things, but I was thinking as we were developing the conversation that in Indo-PACOM, a good use case would be expeditionary comms pushed to, say, an island like South China Sea and Palau. How do we bring communications like that? Fault tolerance is a piece of that, but Ed had mentioned what about the infrastructure that's missing there? It's a heavy lift. The infrastructure piece, first of all, it's a strategic ability, enabling 5G, right? It's not going to bring you the fight. It's going to enable the fight because of the applications and what you're running. So it depends on what the use case is specifically. But let's go back to, let's take EABO. Dr. Corbin mentioned that one. Expeditionary Forces and Marines come in, and they're going to need 5G. So how do we, first of all, there's quite a few things to think about. The spectrum, how is this designed? How many forces is it supporting? Is it a private or a public or some kind of hybrid solution we're working on? The promise of 5G, though, and how it differs from 4G, is that it's going to be operator defined. So what the use case is, we can put together a DevSecOps team to derive that solution to make sure we have all the parameters in place to support the mission.
I'd also add, actually we're working with some of the folks who are working that EABO pilot, I'll call it the tranche effort. On, you look at the form factor, pretty small. We're trying to get it down to support it where it's man packable, and basically stand up a network that sort of stand alone. But where's that core come from? And what's even more interesting is you have that capability, but you want to be able to join other networks when the time comes. You want to be able to, in the best case, right? You come off a ship, you go onto a place of your choosing. You continue to have your network, even if it's completely disconnected from everything else, and seamlessly join back, right? So, because our model is that, using a term that I've used to use, was that you're always trying to reach back to the next best information, right? So you've got what you've got. You always have that with you, and then you may have to reach back to the ship, or you may have to reach back to some cloud that's sitting in Idaho or something. Who knows? But you're always trying to reach back if you can, and so the network and the applications have to be aware of what's available to them, so that they can use and transact on that best data that I've talked about and give it to the warfighter. So it's easy enough. We know how to do that. Stand up a standalone network. But to be able to attach it to something at your choice and remove it is a little bit more challenging, and the applications have to have an understanding of that.
Yeah, maybe building on that, sounds like I'm mic'd up now, sorry about that. I think there's obviously the physical resiliency, which I think the other panelists spoke to, right? Is the infrastructure there? Is it connected? Is it sufficiently resilient to withstand, both environmental and I guess physical attacks? And then there's the security of the network and its quality of service, just in terms of congestion in the network core. So it's not a core part of the 5G standards, but the ability of network slicing and to apply what's called quality of service or quality of experience to the core network from the RAN back through the network also allows for resiliency in networks to partition logically, some connections from other connections, and to enhance the resiliency of the networks.
thank you, Ed. I see an empty mic, so I'm going to keep going. You guys do not go for it.
Hey, Mike, aloha.
Hi, good to see you.
Good seeing you again.
Yes.
Hey, the question I had is, really focused toward the Marine Corps. So with the tranche, with the 5G warehouse, I had a chance to visit, in this case, the Amazon Fulfillment Center. They don't have 5G, right? They've been doing things for years, and it goes really quick. But if you look at our current, say, Marine Corps warehouse, you got a guy with a clipboard doing stuff, and then you got at the other end, you have this thing called Navy ERP, which is, takes a while to get things in. So you're going to have this huge pipe in the middle, 5G, but you have these manual processes on both ends. So how do we fix that? And to the panel, especially on the commercial side, how do you guys fix that? Over.
You started with commercial, so it's yours.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, one of the best applications for 5G is in campus or indoor private environments, I think, and maybe the best application for this audience. So what that entails is, taking a specific set of spectrum and building out a private wireless network within a facility, in this case a warehouse. And what it gets you over the alternatives is two things, right? So I guess if it's a advanced manufacturing facility, you can have the robots connected by wired means, but there's some failure and disorder associated with that. Or you can use Wi-Fi, as you mentioned, which is cheap and ubiquitous, but not necessarily secure, and it also is not great for handoffs. And so, I think a lot of the people we work with, when they think about things like autonomous robots or autonomous vehicles jetting around a logistics facility, be it a port or a warehouse, they want to make sure that it's secure. They want to make sure the connection is persistent. They want to make sure that the connections can hand off from access point to access point. And private wireless networks over 5G or private LTE, I think are a good way to do that.
And also, I'll just add a couple more points, which is the ability to locate things, but also the large number of, I'll say, sensors that providing information in there is basically limitless, where it's limited by other technologies.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other things, if we want to talk about specifically 5G, right? You've got latency, huge jumps if you're thinking about Wi-Fi. The other thing to think about is that there's standards, right? I think you can always find ways to go about building something different. With 5G, I think you've got the majority of use cases, the majority of the core, foundational building blocks of a network that we can all agree on. And then we've got, a variety of different solutions that are all going to be standard. You can figure out integrations with them. You can go to any vendor and ask them to build on top of it. You can figure out any sort of, connectivity strategy without having to reinvent the wheel over and over again.
So while we are on use cases, and since Ed spoke, on the commercial front, there's a bunch of new business models, if you will, emerging, right? And you probably are the closest, and you get a pretty good view of that. Uber is probably the easy example of like connectivity changed how we do taxis. Who knew, right? So, and I think Mike's probably the other guy. So Ed, you want to start with, are any of those business models going to come invade the US DoD operations, if you will? Can I do my warehouses better? Those sorts of things.
Well, I'll try to answer that and also be respectful of all the panelists' time, and maybe just focus on a few of the ones that might be best suited for defense applications. So I think we've already spoken to one, which is warehouses. If you think about the core enabling technologies here, low latency, massive connections, greater sector speed. I think one area is obviously mobile broadband, the ability to bring crew and amenities or connections, into a ship or another facility. We haven't talked a lot about it, but as part of the 5G standards, there's also low power wide area networks, which I think are really interesting. Everyone sort of focuses on the sort of really big iron, fast speeds, low latency for doing the really next generation stuff. But low power wide area networks enable sensors with low power draw, much less expensive because the chipsets are cheaper. And so we see those applied in, for example, tank monitoring, like is this tank full of fuel or is it not? And just sending a simple little message can save so much time, in terms of really giving everyone awareness of what's in place. And the last thing I would mention, which is I think one of the things I'm most excited about in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing applications, and potentially also repair situations, is augmented reality, where you're basically using the 5G network and cloud processing to render onto the physical world, the actual piece of equipment or machinery that you're working on. And so if you're trying to repair something, you could bring up a manual right next to it. You could visually tie, the piece of equipment you're working on and identify it. You could video call back to a second or tertiary repair tech to try to help understand, what to do. And so I think that's actually one of the neatest use cases.
Yeah.
So Ed brushed by IoT. So Mike, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
So do you see AT&T's IoT work showing up in the defense world as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's also called the Battlefield or Battlefield Operations of Internet of Things. You can put a predecessor on that for anything you're trying to solve for. So within the commercial sector, within IoT, we have a lot of projects. And if you look at even more broadly, what is industry doing, right? We have the ORAN initiative, which might not be familiar to everyone here. It's the Open radio access network. It's a consortium of many companies. I think there's over 300 companies represented, all the major carriers. And so the big takeaway from here today is that this consortium is driving a lot of these IoT use cases. Ed, you touched on a couple of those, and high-tech manufacturing is one of them. But I mentioned earlier that the operator or the use case will help define this. So this is really the monumental shift between 4G and 5G, is that 5G allows you to tailor whatever it is, whatever solution you want to drive your KPIs if it's a business, or your capacity or capabilities if it's a DoD context.
So to link the two, the Marine Corps is putting in place this live virtual constructive training capability, and the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Rifles, or whatever it is that's being tracked and monitored within the space is what's being considered. But then there's also the larger case of in the real world, right, which is biometrics and those things that you'll be able to monitor the health of the individuals when they're out there. It's at least it's out there being worked by ONR and others.
Yeah, can I build on that just a little bit? The healthcare biometrics piece. So Joint Base San Antonio, the OUSD, has a use case they put out for bid. And that's one of the use cases is really how do we look at security with network slicing, addresses some of the questions we had, and also the medical use. So there's far more use cases than, like you said, Brian, than we even realize. Right. We're just getting started on this journey, and these are some of the early risk reduction efforts we're getting into.
Thank you, Mike. I see empty mic again. Fix that. Sir.
John Polufchek, retired Navy Admiral. Recently I was at another DoD symposium, and I was taken aback a little bit by, I think it was a Navy Warfare Center, talking about pilots at Pearl Harbor Hickam, talking about pilots at a warehouse, talking about pilots. Clearly, industry is already moved out and using 5G in many applications. We touched on warehousing, we touched on smart manufacturing, we touched. My question, and there was this discussion on use cases. We have to have use cases. What's keeping the Navy, DoD at large, from implementing larger uses of 5G? And I ask this question in relation to the Navy is going through a shipyard recapitalization. The Army is going through the same thing for our Army depots. What's keeping us from going faster?
Dan, Brian, you want to take that? What are the blockers?
I mean, I don't mind jumping in at first. I think you can always say that it's the timeline. We're at the nascent stage of 5G, trying to again understand, trying to learn from industry and understand, where is it taking hold. We can always move faster. We can always, put out pilots. When it comes to full-scale rollouts, that's generally going to be an acquisition challenge as much as it's going to be a capability challenge. So it's not necessarily the technology. It's not necessarily the use cases. I think we've always got an acquisition challenge. But I would also say I think we're looking for industry to bring us novel solutions as well. If industry can find those use cases that we don't have an analog for, I think that's a great motivator for the government to figure out a way to get, whether it's CRADAs or unique acquisition strategies together. I would also say that, there is supply chain issues. There are, specific challenges with trying to do things on larger scale. So pilots, right now I think pilots are a reasonable way for us to ideate over what the technology can do for us, and then build out those acquisition strategies, build out those long-term strategies for what does a larger rollout look like.
So Dan, I'm going to add more to that question. That question was difficult enough, but we've got to make it more difficult. So are there other deployment models we should be thinking of other than traditional acquisitions? So with that, go back to.
Yeah, so let me put it this way. Remember I said we had to come up with the use cases? Well, because generally, Admiral, I'm certain you know the process, right? Which is there's a requirement comes out, we go out and they go and look for find somebody to provide the solution to us. We then put it on contract and a solution gets put in place. This one was slightly different. But let's find a use case for 5G and we'll sort of figure it out. I think in this case, at the beginning of all of this, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think that's when it all started. Looked like transport. You say, okay, what do we do transport? Even as recently as the last couple months, we said, do we have a requirement for 5G? And it's like, no, it's just transport. So we've at least gotten past the point that we don't need a new requirement for 5G. It's now transport that does a bunch of other stuff. Now, how you allow it to do those other things, that may in fact need a requirement, but at least we have the ability to now buy the radios, and put the infrastructure in place. If the acquisition community makes the point that it's the best business case to do that. And now I don't want to throw it all on the acquisition community. They buy most of the stuff, but me as in the CIO shop, I own the responsibility for making sure the business case supports the item. Meaning it's the best value decision for the Marine Corps to be able to do that. I suspect you have somebody in your office that does it as well. And we would not be putting a new network in a warehouse because of this, because of the other reasons we already talked about. Hey, man, you really have over-provisioned that warehouse to do that. But it was about the pilot. We're trying to figure out how we use this thing in the right way, even if it's, we're learning, right? So one of the commandants, my commandants, not his, my commandants protected, hey, we got to get out there and test this stuff, fail, roll it back into the next iteration of this thing and get after it, because right now we are not getting after it in a lot of ways. Over.
Forgive me, I got to clean this one up, because Ed thinks this is not one of his questions, but actually it is. So given what you've seen the commercial world do, is there all new technologies have early adopter use cases, all that stuff, right? So do you have any advice for the government folks, now that you've heard some of the use cases, of like follow the following industry, or do warehouses before you do ships, or some such thing? So is there a sequencing here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, again, I'm going to speak completely from a commercial standpoint. I have no idea what's involved in a full procurement and maybe don't want to know. But I think in terms of the key difference between the private sector and I think the defense sector in this instance is that 5G is at its essence a fabric, right? It's a connectivity fabric. Mm-hmm. And it's a fabric that's already been deployed over most of the United States and most of the world in terrestrial environments. And so it's available and it's managed by service providers like AT&T and others. And so because the fabric is there, you can attack each use case in turn. And it really needs to be attacked as a use case, where you say, okay, we have this fabric in place, it enables these things. How do we unpack that and create a little miniature business case for, automating the robots? Now, okay, let's get the sensors attached to this process, to adding augmented reality to this workflow so that it takes half the time that it used to reducing downtime in these situations. And then you sort of knock all of those out versus making it a huge decision, where everyone just sort of hangs if you will, the Christmas ornaments on the Christmas tree and just sort of taking it one at a time. That's how we would typically advise our clients to approach it, but I would defer to the panel here.
Thank you. Ma'am, you had a question?
Yes, Maria Metzger, 5A Sauce. I was just wondering, I had some questions about the expeditionary comm use of 5G. Do we see that more as like a local network that's in the expeditionary comm, or would we see 5G being used as like a long haul connection back to whoever, the ship, AOC, what have you?
Yeah, great question, Maria. If I could take it.
Mike.
Since I brought it up. So it could be a variety of things, right? So what's the backhaul? If you want to think of a WAN concentrator, it could be the backhaul could be satellite, it could be fiber, right? And so there's that piece. But I gave you the example of like Palau, right? So setting up, or some other island in the Pacific with very limited resources. Let's say the airfield is there, maybe an unimproved airfield. So in an ACE operation or EABO operation, I would imagine there would be folks deployed who have skill sets, but you're not going to have your full-on comm skill sets, or maybe even no comm driver for that situation. So it's going to have to be something that can be easily set up. And I would think, in the Pacific scenario, you'd have a satellite backhaul, so you're probably going to need that. That's as minimum. Now, if you want a forward operating base, you're going to need maybe enough, power for 10,000 users, especially in the case of like a Korea rollout, right? If we have a forward operating base, you need to bring forces forward according to the old plans. So that's what you'd be looking at there. Much larger form factor, requires host nation spectrum and so forth.
Thank you, Mike. I do want to flip into the future view, but before that, I'm going to ask Dan and Brian, what keeps you up at night on this stuff?
Yeah, so I think we've been sort of touching on it in a lot of areas. So one is that we don't go fast enough to take advantage of and get the competitive advantage that comes with adopting this technology. I mean, once we really make the decision to adopt this thing all in, it's going to take us, who knows, years to be able to do it because of the acquisition part. But the other one is we do it too fast, right? We do it too fast and we don't really know how to do it well, and we make some decisions, or we don't have the people, right? We don't have the people to operate it and execute it. We don't have the sustainment capabilities that are necessary for it. All those things that we criticize the acquisition community for analyzing are the things that we'll complain about because we did it too fast, right? So they give it to us fast, and we don't have the training stuff. We don't in the pipeline. We don't have the sustainment tail for it. We don't know how to operate it. All of those same things. So do we understand the security for these things and new technology for all practical purposes? And do we understand all of the implications of everything we're trying to do with it? There's an intersection of a lot of new technologies that are going to be coming with this stuff. AI, machine learning, that in itself is going to have some sexy things associated with it that could cause us to stumble, and we're using it with 5G, right? So all these things are coming together, and the cloud, put that one in there as well. And so the complexity of all of these things is really challenging. I really look at the CISO and say, man, I don't want to be you as you try to figure out where these risks profile is for any application that's using all of these various IT-related items. So it's really I'll stop there.
No, so I would agree, right? I think you hit on the most important ones, getting out over our skis on risk. This is a new technology. There are not a lot of adversarial, scenarios to think about yet. But I would also say experience with the technology, right? Do we have, you talked about sustainment tails. I would talk about maintenance tails. I would talk about, do we even have the institutional knowledge? Yes, obviously we've got vendors, but are we thinking in terms of where 5G is going to intersect the mission? Are we thinking about those second and third order effects of what's going to happen when we bring 5G on? Opening up, we could talk about supply chain risk management. There are some very specific concerns there when it comes to 5G. I would also, just throw out the unique use cases that come bring with them unique challenges. And I think as we're rolling these technologies out, risk management has to take a different approach. We really have to think about the expertise of the people.
Thank you, Brian. Did you have a question?
Hi, Rob Chung from Deloitte. A quick question about expeditionary operations. If you go back to the terrace back here, you can see a Viasat tent where they do have the ability to do the backhaul as well as the front haul through federated wireless, and then they were one of the winners in Tranche 1. So that deployable kit is possible. My question then really comes down to, has anyone seen where we, DoD, have been able to crack the nut on a deployable kit where we've gone from end to end to request that licensed spectrum or unlicensed spectrum, however you want to look at it, from that host nation to allow us to turn that actual kit on, right? That's, I think, kind of the sticky wicket for all of this. I think the infrastructure is there, like the equipment is there today to do this, but has anyone seen that type of activity actually occur with green lights all across the board?
Mike, just because I know too much, this one drops in your head.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. You're right. Tactical kits do currently exist, so I'm not saying they don't. So in the case that you're referring to, it's probably, and I haven't seen the kit you're referring to, but it's probably a private network, right? So you're not leveraging host nation. So it's self-contained. Now, if we want to take advantage of the greater opportunity here, and that is to build maybe a hybrid approach where you have either fiber connectivity or access some kind of core, then you start, opening more capabilities, such as network slicing, right? And getting that end-to-end, like a private network, right, between the user device, and the application. And that's where you really, you bring some of the good benefits of 5G. Hopefully I answered your question there.
Thanks, Mike. So I want to flip into the future more. 5G is nice, but what about beyond 5G, right? Come on. There's a bigger number, 6, 7, something there. Future G, I think, is what it's being called. So I'll start with the commercial folks. What do you see as the driving attributes of future G? What's going on there?
Yeah.
And then we'll get to the government folks and ask them, what's your ask from future G?
I'll continue talking real quick. So just 6G, what I think about, there's nothing solidified yet, but if you want to research a topic, you're thinking of terahertz, frequencies. You're thinking of maybe terabyte per second throughput, low latencies, maybe in the double digits or potential. There's no promises here, but that's kind of the thinking. The takeaway here would be an order of magnitude improvement of what 5G promises, and we don't even recognize what 5G can bring. So that's where we are. That's where my mind is right now. Maybe you guys have a better perspective.
Yeah,
Tell him he's wrong.
No, I think I would agree with those things. Those are sort of the extension of 5G. In terms of really novel capabilities, I think this is all being just thought about now. One is integration of LEO networks. Could be really interesting. To the extent it gets brought into the standards. There's really interesting stuff. Once you have all of these antenna and heterogeneous nodes out there, you can start to do really interesting things with sensing. Just with the actual RF. Right, so you could do like environmental reconstruction and imaging potentially just via RF, and that could be really interesting. And then I think you need to get the cost of some of the low-power devices down, like to do some of the monitoring and maintenance. You'd really like those things to be much cheaper even than they are today, and more persistent in terms of battery life.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So you touched on the two that I think I would like to see us continue to miniaturize it, right? Make those packs. Make those pack outs smaller, make them easier to port, make them more portable, and then battery life, right? Anything that we can do to reduce dependency on giant battery packs, longer term ability for communications to levy, especially as we're talking about sensors out there, getting a little bit more bandwidth for those, but really creating more battery life, creating more ubiquity, and then absolutely bringing spectrum together. If we could bring satellite, if we could bring terrestrial, if we can bring LEO, if we can bring all of these technologies together into single chipsets that create a homogeneous network, I think we're good. We're getting good in the data side. Latency's really taking steps forward. I think now we want to start thinking about how do we bring together wireless signals and really start to iterate on the technology itself.
The only thing I would add, I agree with all of these gentlemen, and there's a lot of research going on in this area, but I would say that I just recently bought a new Samsung phone and it said 6G compliant.
We're out of time, but we'll take one more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. So we're mainly talking about communication capabilities, and just in the last few words you were mentioning about the ecosystem of different technologies. In addition to communication, what is your perspective in terms of location awareness, situation awareness that 5G can bring in? Because there are dedicated signals and dedicated resources in 5G that can be very beneficial for that.
You want me to take that one? Yeah,
Sure,
so
why not?
he was looking at me, so
Go for it.
yeah, if you're familiar with the third generation partnership project, right?
Release 17, for example.
Yeah, so release 17, which is due, actually it's being rolled out now, I think, right? So what we're referring to is it's a consortium. It's been around since 1G days, and these are the updates and the capabilities that 5G will bring. And so the real-time location services are one of the things being rolled out. Another thing, and that can impact UASs. Satellite backhaul is another one. Services regarding enhanced services for network slicing and other orchestration would help as well. So these are being rolled out and have yet to be experimented with in the DoD use case. I think in the commercial cases, they're getting the uptake is faster and the adoption is faster. So my job is to bring some of that from industry to help with the problem sets here.
Thank you, folks. We could do this for the next 3 hours, but we're out of time. So I do want to thank the panelists. There was a phrase I heard in the previous panel, which is efficiency equals lethality. I'm going to add to that. 5G enables efficiency. With that, thank you so much. These guys are around. Ask them more questions. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.